So have you thought about lately that Jesus walked on water? Well, if I were one of the disciples, I think I would tell the story something like this. One day, Jesus, out in the countryside, fed 5,000 people when we really had no food at all. And in the end, there were 12 baskets left over. What a miracle. Then he put us in a boat, us disciples, and sent us to the other side. He stayed behind, dismissed the crowd, and then we learned later he went up to the mountainside to pray. We were making our way across the sea through the night. It was the middle of the night when all of a sudden the wind began to kick up, began to rain, the waves began to come on over the boat and were very big and troublesome. I noticed that Peter, James, and John, who were fishermen themselves, had a look of concern on their face, which concerned me even more. We were worried. Were we going to make it? Were we going to sink? They had been through a lot of difficult times on the sea, and I could tell they were worried. Then, unexpectedly and out of nowhere, come Jesus walking on the water. I heard someone in the boat say, "It's a ghost!" We were so frightened. We'd be more concerned about the sea or this ghost out on the water. Jesus yelled back, "Don't be afraid. It's I. Take courage." Peter, who was the unspoken leader of our group, yelled back, "Jesus, if it's really you, have me to come to you." Jesus motioned, "Come." So Peter stepped out on the water, and he was walking on the water too, making his way toward Jesus. I could tell though, he became hesitant. He started looking around and started sinking. He yelled, "Jesus, save me!" And Jesus was there immediately, helping him back up onto the water. And he said, "O ye of little faith, why did you doubt?" Before we knew it, Jesus and Peter were back in the boat, and the sea had calmed down. We were flabbergasted. We worshiped him. We kneeled. We bowed. We said, "Truly, you are the Son of God. We give you our worship." When we got to the other side, some people recognized us, and they began to bring all their sick to Jesus, and even those who would touch his robe, the hem of his garment, would be healed. It was an amazing miracle. So let's just think about that story for a few moments. And let's think about, to begin with, the crisis that the disciples found themselves in when they were out in the middle of that ocean. Not ocean, the middle of that sea. Probably felt like an ocean to them. And they were around in the storm. You know, somebody has said that we don't tend to leave our place of pain until that place is more painful than the change and the pain and the change that we're going to experience. You know, that's what crisis does to us sometimes. And God actually will permit it. He will permit that pain so that we realize that where we are is not a good place and that we need to grow and to change. You might ask yourself, why did Jesus send the disciples on alone when he knew that they were going to enter into this crisis alone out there on the sea? Well, it said he went up to the mountain to pray, and we wonder what he was praying about. We know that he prayed throughout the night before he called the disciples. We know that he is our advocate, and he continues to pray for us. So we can imagine that he was there on the mountain praying for the disciples, knowing that they were about to come into a moment of crisis, and that he would show up at the scene at that moment, and it would be a powerful growth moment, a moment of development in their lives. God permits us to enter crisis in our life. We often, fear those difficulties, but often it's the discoveries that we make in those experiences that draw us nearer to God, that increase our faith, and cause us to mature in our Christian life. God permits those kind of things. You remember the story of Job? Do you remember how that began? All of that suffering that Job described throughout the book of Job? But in the first chapter, it talks about the angels coming before God to present themselves before God. And that Satan was there too to present himself. And God initiated a conversation with Satan, and he said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Satan didn't initiate that conversation. God did. And Satan said, "Oh, yes, but you protect him. You've given him so many good things. Take that away and he'll curse you." And then began a series of events that God allowed, that God permitted in Job's life. He lost his family. He lost his wealth. And in the end, he lost his health when boils broke out on his body that were very painful and troublesome. And yet, in it all, Job was faithful. He did protest. He did struggle. He was faithful. And God used that in his life to speak to Job and to remind him that he is in control, and Job doesn't know what's going on behind the scenes. Now, why does God permit those kind of things in our life? Why does he allow crisis to come? Well, let me ask you this. What's more precious than gold? What's more valuable than gold? Well, interestingly enough, 1 Peter answers that question. Listen to verse 6 of chapter 1. "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief of all kinds of trials." Verse 7. "These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may prove genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." Our faith is more precious than gold. And God allows crisis, difficulties to come into our life because it often increases our faith. It increases our trust in God. It increases our maturity. And there is nothing in the world, there is nothing beyond this life that is more valuable than our faith and our trust in God. That is the core of what is the most valuable thing in life. Now, that doesn't mean that we always respond in a way that's mature or that's perfect. As a matter of fact, we do have doubts. We do have struggles. We do have failures. And like Job, sometimes we protest. "God, why are you allowing this?" We saw it in Job's life, and we also see it in Peter's example here. Peter didn't give us the perfect example, even though he called out to come out and to walk on the water. What does it say happened here? Look at verse 29 as it tells this story. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, when he looked around, when he saw the circumstances, when he realized the difficulty he was in, when he realized the craziness of the situation, when he saw all that, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. And he even said, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" You see, Peter didn't respond to this perfectly. Even though he had faith to take those first steps, he still became frightened. He still looked at his circumstances. But you know what happens just 2 chapters later? What Jesus says to Peter in verse 18? He says this. In verse 16, chapter 16. 2 chapters later. "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." 2 chapters later, and after he began to sink on the water, Jesus is saying this to him. And do you remember what happened with Peter at the end of the gospel story when Jesus was being on trial? And Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And the last time he called curses down on himself and he said, "I swear to God, I don't know this man." And what happened to Jesus? What did Jesus say to Peter just after that? After he rose from the dead and they met on the lake shore and Jesus was there frying up the fish for them. He said to him, he welcomed Peter and he said to him, "Do you love me? Then feed my sheep." He welcomed Peter. He embraced Peter. He cared for Peter. You know what he didn't do? He didn't kick him to the side. He didn't dismiss him. He didn't just shove him out of the way. He still grew Peter. He grew his faith. He welcomed him. He used him. And he used him to establish the church. Here is a key spiritual insight that we need to take with us. Faith life is a journey that is filled with some missteps along the way.